The fat recording of Tillman Pierce. Tillman Pierce was born on April 10, 1876, in the state of South Carolina. The first record found on Tillman is the 1880 federal census. In it, he is 3 years old, and his birthplace is listed as South Carolina. His home in 1870 is in Brightsville, Marlboro, South Carolina, and his race is listed as mulatto. The record says his father's name is George Pierce, who is 48 years old, and married one, Harriet Pierce, who is 29 years old. Both of them fathered 6 children at the time of this census. The eldest of their children was William, age 14, James, age 10, Henry, age 7, and the only daughter. Her name is Jane. She is 5 years old. Then, there is Tillman at age 3, and his little brother, who does not appear to have a first name, but he is listed as Pierce, and he is a 1-year-old. The 1890 federal censuses were burned due to a fire, and the Bang has yet to uncover Tillman Pierce's 1900 and 1910 census records. The next record pushes us forward 40 years. So, in the 1920 federal census, we find Tillman at the age of 45. His home in 1920 is Mechanicsville, Darlington, South Carolina. He is married to one, Cherry Pierce, who is 35 years of age, and she also was born in South Carolina. They both have 4 children, 3 sons, and 1 daughter. The eldest of the boys is Eddie. He is 12 years old. Next is Winston, who is 4 years old, and has a little sister under him, and her name is Josephine. She is 3 years old. Finally, the youngest son, who is an infant, his name is Jesse. There is a World War I draft registration card for Tillman Pierce. Serial number 3134, and order number 462. In it, Tillman wrote his age down as 42 years old, and his nearest relative is Cherry Pierce, his wife. The date of this registration card is September 12, 1918. And it was signed at the local board for Darlington County, state of South Carolina. At that time, Tillman's second son Winston was about 2 years old. In the 1930 census, Tillman is now 48 years old. He is still living in South Carolina, but now, he is a widower. His wife Cherry died sometime just before, or in 1930. Living in the house at this time were Winston, who was 14 years old, and his baby sister Josephine, who was 12 years old. We now see that the baby in the 1920 census, with no first name at the time, was a child that was eventually named Jesse, and he is 10 years old at the time of the 1930 census. We also see 3 new additions to the family. 3 more sons were born under Jesse. Tillman Jr., age 9. Clayton, age 7. And Walter, age 5. Because Walter was born in 1928, it would be safe to assume that Tillman's wife Cherry must have died after 1928, and before the 1930 census. But because Tillman was 48 years old in the 1930 census, we can calculate that his census record must have been documented in 1936, because Tillman should have been 54 years old. But the birth year that Tillman maintained on the records that he signed himself, he declared that he was born in 1876. His 1880 census records his birth year in 1877. The 1920 census records it in 1875, but his 1930 and his 1940 census record records his birth year to be in the year 1882. That's at least a 6-year difference. Even with this 6-year difference, if we are to understand the true timing of the passing of his wife Cherry, we can still be calculated it based on the birth of the last child that she gave birth to. That child was Walter Pierce, who was born about 1928, give or take a year. This closes the gap, and it would be safe to assume that Cherry Pierce died between 1928 and 1930. The last census for Tillman Pierce is the 1940 federal census. In it, Tillman is 58 years old, still living in Mechanicsville, Darlington, South Carolina, and he is still a widower. However, his birth year is listed as around 1882, again, Tillman hasn't remarried, and is still a widower. He is also still living in Mechanicsville, Darlington, South Carolina. The question, highest grade completed, is now added to the census. Tillman records that he has second-grade education. Living in the house is his last 4 sons. Jesse is 19, Tillman Jr. is 16, Clayton is now 14 years old, and Walter is 12. Tillman Pierce died on April 30, 1944, 100 years after George Pierce, who is listed as his father in the 1880 census. At the time of his death, Tillman was living in Darlington, South Carolina. He died at the age of 68. His death certificate was signed by his grandson, Benton Pierce. Benton is the firstborn of Winston Pierce, and Winston is the second son of Tillman. Now, because the 1880 census listed George Pierce as the father of Tillman, and the death certificate gives the name of his father as Ben Pierce, and his mother as Myra, maiden name Wilds, the Black Ancestry Network group has placed Ben Pierce on the in search of list for further investigation. As it is now, it could be argued that George Pierce could be the slave owner of this Pierce family group. More information on this matter will be forthcoming at some time in the coming months. The next fat recording for this family group will be Winston Pierce, the second son born to Tillman and Cherry Pierce. And as stated before, Ben Pierce is on the in search of list, and George Pierce is under investigation as the possible slave owner of this Pierce family group, due to Ben Pierce being identified as Tillman's father on his death certificate. Well, I hope that you enjoyed listening to this fat recording of Tillman Pierce. If so, please like to help the channel, subscribe, and turn on notifications so that you can be notified whenever new content is added to the channel. Thank you for listening. This fat recording will end in 3, 2, 1.